No one in our small town, forgotten by time and surrounded by the imposing mountains of the Andes, could have imagined that the arrival of young Father Gabriel would change our lives in such a radical way. I was barely 16 years old when he appeared, full of energy, charisma, and a smile that seemed to light up even the darkest corners of the church. My family, like most of those who lived there, was deeply devout. My mother attended Mass every week, and my sisters, Laura and Teresa, sang in the choir. My father, though somewhat more reserved, also respected the traditions. Before Father Gabriel's arrival, the town priest was an old man, Father Anselmo. He had served for decades and was loved by all. However, age had caught up with him, and his sermons had become increasingly slow. His voice was barely a murmur. When it was announced that he would be replaced, there was sadness, but also hope that someone new would bring vitality to the community. And that was how Father Gabriel arrived. At just 27 years old, he exuded a self-confidence that was almost contagious. The first Sunday he officiated Mass, the church was filled to bursting. We all wanted to see the new priest. He took over the altar with an energy that few of us had seen before. I think we had grown too accustomed to Father Anselmo's slow pace. Gabriel's voice was firm, his message powerful, and his eyes seemed to pierce through each person as if telling them exactly what they needed to hear. My mother left the church that day saying that God had sent us a true angel to watch over us. Over time, Gabriel became the center of the town's life. He organized activities for the children, taught catechism classes, and visited the sick. He seemed tireless. But as the months passed, small signs began to emerge that perhaps not everything was as perfect as it seemed at first. The women of the town, especially the younger ones, couldn't help but admire him. He was tall, with dark, neatly combed hair and a smile that could disarm even the most stoic. Some girls started staying behind after catechism classes just to talk to him, and soon rumors began to spread. It was said that Gabriel was too friendly with some of the young women, that he spent time with them in private, under the pretext of helping them strengthen their faith. When these rumors reached my mother's ears, she immediately dismissed them as nothing more than the jealous gossip of envious people. Father Gabriel is a good man, she told us. He is a man of God. However, I couldn't ignore those whispers so easily. Often in the afternoons, when I returned from working in the fields with my father, I saw Father Gabriel walking along the outskirts of town. He always said he did it because he liked to reflect and be close to nature, but something about his walks seemed different, almost as if he were being guided toward a specific destination. Then, one Sunday afternoon, everything began to change. Gabriel returned from one of his walks with an expression I had never seen on him before. During Mass, he announced that he had received a divine vision while meditating at a place a few kilometers from town. He claimed to have heard the voice of God, who had given him clear instructions. Our community needed to unite more than ever and dedicate our lives fully to faith. The effect of his words on the parishioners was immediate. His message was so passionate that most accepted it without question. My mother and many other women began attending Mass daily, while the men invested their time and resources into beautifying the church. Gabriel became a central, almost untouchable figure. But I couldn't help but wonder, why had the lake been the place where God had manifested himself? It was a quiet place, yes, surrounded by trees, with an overwhelming silence. Some fishermen claimed the lake had something strange about it, that at times it seemed to whisper when the wind was still. But these stories had always been dismissed as mere legends. From that moment on, something in Gabriel changed. His charisma intensified. I swear he became almost hypnotic. Even those who had doubted him before now followed him with unwavering devotion. At a community meeting, he proposed that an old, abandoned farm on the outskirts of town be given to him so he could convert it into a space dedicated to spiritual education. Without much opposition, the townspeople agreed. Renovations began immediately, and soon the town's youth started spending more and more time at the farm under Gabriel's guidance. It was said they spent their days praying and studying. But the rumors about the priest's behavior grew louder. Some families noticed that their daughters returned home changed, quieter, more withdrawn, as if they were keeping a secret they couldn't share. My older sister, Laura, was one of the first to join the group. At first, my mother was delighted that she was participating in something so pure. But soon, she grew concerned. Laura came home late, avoided questions, and barely spoke to us. One night, I heard her crying in her room. When I tried to talk to her, she shut the door in my face. My concern deepened when a neighbor, Don Esteban, spoke to my father. He said he had seen Father Gabriel walking through the town late at night, always heading toward the lake. Although Gabriel was loved by many, Don Esteban admitted that something about his behavior seemed strange, as if he were no longer the same since receiving his so-called revelation. My father, though respectful, didn't want to get involved in discussions. But for me, those comments confirmed what I already feared. Father Gabriel was changing, and not for the better. One night, I made a decision. I had to find out what was happening. I followed Father Gabriel as he walked toward the lake, keeping a safe distance, hiding among the trees and bushes. When he reached the shore, he knelt down and began speaking in a low voice. I couldn't make out his words, but they didn't sound like a prayer. It was almost as if he was having a conversation. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and the once still lake began to tremble. I can't say it was an extremely striking sight, but something was happening. I stepped back, scared, and ended up stumbling, making noise. Gabriel turned his head in my direction, but I managed to escape before he could see me. When I returned home, I couldn't sleep. I knew something was wrong, but I had no idea how to deal with it. My thoughts revolved around what I had seen at the lake and Father Gabriel's increasingly strange behavior. During breakfast, my mother noticed my silence. When she asked if something was wrong, I simply shook my head. I didn't know how to explain what I had witnessed without sounding insane. As the days passed, Gabriel became even more influential. The farm we had given him was now the center of his divine work. The young women of the town came and went, carrying food, blankets, clothes, and even personal belongings from their families. Everything was given with great enthusiasm. No one questioned his intentions, and the few voices that dared to express doubt were silenced, either by disapproving glances or by one of Father Gabriel's impassioned sermons during Sunday Mass. My sister Laura, who had once been so full of life, had become a shadow of herself. She spent most of her time at the farm, returning home only for meals. When we tried to talk to her, her answers were evasive and monotonous. My mother insisted that Laura was simply closer to God than ever, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One night, while we were having dinner, Laura suddenly blurted out something that sent a chill through me. Father Gabriel says that something is going to happen in the town soon. Something big, she said, absent-mindedly playing with her fork. Something that will change our lives forever. My mother smiled, delighted by the father's words, but I felt a knot form in my stomach. What do you mean? I asked. Laura simply replied, "We'll know when the time is right." The rumors about Father Gabriel continued to grow. Some families noticed that their daughters were acting strangely, becoming more reserved, changing their schedules, even experiencing unexplained fainting spells. Don Esteban, our neighbor, mentioned that he had seen Gabriel entering the farm late at night with several girls. Although this might seem harmless to some, he once told my father, the truth is, it's extremely disturbing. He's too young to be so holy. No one has that much devotion without hiding something. My father didn't want to engage in debates, but I knew Don Esteban's words had unsettled him. My mother, however, refused to believe any accusation against Gabriel. He is a man of God, she insisted. People gossip because they cannot stand to see something so pure and true. But things only got darker. Several young women who regularly attended the farm stopped appearing in town. Their families claimed they were simply helping with the work, but others whispered that they had disappeared without explanation. One afternoon, while returning from the fields with my father, I decided to take a detour toward the lake. Something was pulling me there, a feeling, an instinct, a need for answers. When I arrived, what I saw made my blood run cold. Near the shore, candles were burning in a perfect circle. In the center, there were remains of what appeared to be small animals, their bodies torn apart. The air was thick, heavy, as if something invisible was pressing against my chest. I backed away slowly, making sure not to make a sound this time. I returned home with my heart pounding in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I debated whether to tell my father what I had seen or keep it to myself. In the morning, I made my decision. Dad, there's something strange at the lake, I began. I think Father Gabriel. Fernando, don't get involved in things that don't concern you, he interrupted. The last thing we need is trouble with the Father. His response frustrated me. But more than that, it made me realize just how deep Gabriel's control over the town had become. Shortly after, Laura collapsed. We found her passed out in her room, burning with fever, mumbling words we couldn't understand. My mother, desperate, wanted to take her to the nearest doctor. But Laura suddenly woke up, grabbing my mother's wrist. Don't take me out of town, she pleaded. Her eyes were filled with tears. Father Gabriel can help me. He knows what to do. Reluctantly, my mother agreed. That same afternoon, Gabriel came to our house. He locked himself in Laura's room for almost an hour. When he emerged, he said he had prayed for her and assured us that she would soon recover. My mother thanked him in a hushed voice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I decided I had to investigate. That night, while everyone was asleep, I slipped out and made my way to the farm. There were a few dim lights inside, and I could hear murmuring. I crept closer and peered through one of the windows. What I saw left me paralyzed. Several young girls were gathered in a circle. Gabriel stood in the center, holding what looked like a Bible. But he wasn't reading prayers. He was reciting something in a language I didn't recognize. And I swear, the girls looked hypnotized. I slowly backed away, trying not to make a sound. But suddenly, the chanting stopped. I heard footsteps approaching. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. When I finally reached my house, I was trembling, yet trying to process what I had just seen. I knew I had to do something. But what could a 16-year-old boy do against someone like Gabriel? His influence was too strong. Most of the town was on his side. Yet I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. After that night at the farm, my life changed. I couldn't ignore the signs, the whispers that seemed to spread through the entire town, Gabriel's growing influence over everyone, including my own family. But the more I tried to warn them, the more isolated I felt. My mother said I was paranoid, that Father Gabriel only wanted the best for us. Laura, though still weak and distant, insisted that the priest had helped her, that she had no one else to turn to. The lake, once a serene place, had become the epicenter of fear. Some said they could hear strange chanting at night. Others spoke of a thick fog rising from the water. And worst of all, there was an inexplicable stench in the air. I often saw Gabriel visiting the lake from afar. His figure stood motionless against the full moon, arms outstretched as if in prayer. But something about that posture unsettled me. It didn't seem like a prayer. It seemed like something deeper, something darker. That was when I began to wonder, was he really speaking to God, or was something else answering him from beneath those waters? Over time, some townspeople began to voice their concerns. Don Esteban, a man respected for his wisdom and experience, was the first to speak out. At a community meeting, he stood before the crowd. There is something deeply wrong with the way Gabriel is running the church, he declared. His words sent a ripple of unease through the room, and for the first time in months, someone dared to question Father Gabriel. It is not normal for a priest to spend so much time in isolation, surrounded only by young girls, much less to allow our faith to become a cult. His words provoked a murmur among those present, but Gabriel, always eloquent and charismatic, knew how to handle the situation masterfully. I understand his concerns, Don Esteban told him in an extremely calm voice. But everything I do is for the good of this community. If there are any doubts, I invite anyone to visit the farm and see with their own eyes the work we do. Many were convinced by his composed tone, but I could see the flash of anger in his eyes. Gabriel was not used to being questioned, and I knew this would not end well for Don Esteban. Days later, Don Esteban suddenly fell ill. No one knew what was wrong with him. His body was consumed by fevers and inexplicable pains. My worried father went to visit him, but returned saying the old man could barely speak. When my mother suggested that Gabriel might be able to help, my father flatly refused. I don't want that man to set foot in our house again, he said with a firmness he rarely showed. Esteban had told me that he didn't want Gabriel near us either. That night, Don Esteban passed away. Some said it was a coincidence, that his age and poor health had taken their toll, but others, including me, couldn't help but think his death was connected to his words against Gabriel. Meanwhile, rumors about the young people who frequented the farm continued to spread. Several of them began to show signs of pregnancy, and when questioned, they avoided answering. My mother, although a faithful follower of Father Gabriel, began to worry, especially about Laura. "I don't want anything bad to happen to you," she told her one night at dinner. "If something is bothering you, you have to tell me, daughter." Laura, her eyes fixed on her plate, simply shook her head. "Father Gabriel always takes care of us, Mom. You have nothing to worry about." But her words failed to reassure us. Something in her tone was different, almost mechanical, as if she were repeating something she had been taught to say. Eventually, the situation caught the attention of the diocese in the nearest town. A group of priests was sent to investigate the allegations against Gabriel. When they arrived, he greeted them with a broad smile and a carefree attitude. "Of course, you can check everything you want," he told them. "I have nothing to hide." However, as the priests conducted interviews and visited the farm, they began to find evidence that something was not right. The books Gabriel used in his lessons contained passages that did not belong to any Catholic doctrine. Several of the young women confessed to having been manipulated into performing acts they described as rituals. One of them, in a fit of tears, revealed that Gabriel claimed he was guided directly by the voice of God. When the priests confronted Gabriel with this evidence, he simply laughed. "Are you afraid of true faith?" he asked. "Everything I have done has been for the good of this community. If you can't see that, perhaps it is you who need to reflect on your faith." The tension in the village reached a peak when the priests decided to report their findings. But before they could, Gabriel disappeared, taking with him 3 of the young women who had been closest to him, leaving behind a trail of confusion and fear. The farm was searched by authorities and the priests, who found evidence of rituals, figures carved in wood, strange drawings on the walls, and a crude, makeshift altar. The community was devastated. Many began to question their faith, while others simply refused to talk about it. In the following weeks, stories of nightmares and strange occurrences spread among the townspeople. The women who had been involved with Gabriel said they felt a constant presence watching them. Several had to be exorcised by the visiting priests, who revealed the full horrors they had uncovered. I myself could not escape the impact of these events. Though I had never been close to Gabriel, his influence had forever changed the dynamics of our community. Many left town, unable to bear the memories. My family was also affected. Laura was never the same again. And though she managed to partially recover over time, she always carried the scars of those days. With Father Gabriel gone, a deathly silence fell over the town. In the first weeks after his departure, most tried to move on, but it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. The marks of his presence were everywhere, in the hollow eyes of the women who had been closest to him, in the families who now doubted their faith, and in the abandoned farm that no one dared to visit. My sister Laura, who had not been among the girls who left with Gabriel, continued to battle her own demons. She would often wake up screaming at night, convinced something was watching her. Sometimes she whispered that Gabriel had warned her this would happen, that it was a test from God. I don't know if my sister helped the priests who performed the exorcisms, but liberation took months. Meanwhile, more villagers began speaking of strange dreams and unsettling sensations. Some claimed to see Father Gabriel in nightmares, others spoke of shadows moving between houses at night. But the incident that shook the town the most involved Don Esteban's family. He had been one of the few to openly challenge Gabriel. One morning, his youngest son screamed that someone had entered his room. When they turned on the light, they found wet footprints leading from the window to the child's bed. Despite locking and reinforcing the windows, the incident repeated itself twice more. My family was not immune to these occurrences. One night, while I was sleeping, I was awakened by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Thinking it was my father, I got up to see him, but the hallway was empty. However, Laura's door was slightly ajar, and inside, I could hear whispering. When I opened it, I found her sitting on her bed, mumbling incoherently. When I tried to wake her, she pushed me with a strength I didn't know she had, screaming until my mother arrived to calm her down. The women who had been closest to Gabriel suffered the most. They spoke of a constant presence watching them and were plagued by nightmares. One of the most alarming cases was Clara, one of Gabriel's most devoted followers. During her exorcism, it was said that marks began appearing on her skin, as if something invisible was scratching her. The priest performing the ritual claimed she was possessed by an entity that fed on despair and guilt. Though they managed to free her, Clara was never the same again. One day, she simply left town, never to return. I knew I couldn't continue living in this state of uncertainty. Eventually, I spoke to Don Raphael, an old man who had lived in the village all his life. When we discussed what had happened at the farm, he told me something that made my blood run cold. "That lake has always had something in it," he said. "My grandfather told me the water carries restless souls, and that those who hear its whispers are doomed to lose themselves. I don't think it was God who spoke to Father Gabriel. It was something else, maybe a dead soul or a demon, something that deceived him." I wondered if Gabriel had been a victim of this force, or if he had willingly followed it, regardless of the damage he caused. The diocese declared the estate cursed and ordered its demolition. But even after it was reduced to rubble, the town remained gripped by an unshakable tension. No one dared to set foot near the site for years. Though we never heard from Father Gabriel again, rumors of his whereabouts persisted. Some said he had fled to another region, continuing his influence elsewhere. Others claimed to have seen him near the lake, always accompanied by the 3 young women who had vanished with him. As for me, I knew I could not stay. The shadows of the past were too heavy, and I feared that if I remained, I too would be consumed. In time, my family also left. Many years have passed, but the scars remain. My sister Laura never married, and every time I hear the toll of a church bell, I remember what happened in that small town. Perhaps we will never know the full truth about Father Gabriel and the force that spoke to him, but his dark legacy remains a warning. Beware of those who seek power under the guise of faith.